Whoa, this is the Global Travel Channel podcast show, and I am your host, Mark Philpott. Welcome. It's really good to have you here. You might be a first-time listener, you might be a regular listener to the show. It doesn't matter. I just love the fact that you're here listening to the show. Now remember, if you do love what you hear today, why not send the show link to somebody to listen to? It might be a family member, a friend, might even be a work colleague. Tell them to listen to it during work when they're typing away on their keyboard. We want to get as many people as we can listening to the Global Travel Channel. This show is all about me interviewing people across the world about their incredible travel experiences. We have such diverse guests on the show talking about amazing things, and today we're going to learn a lot more about the United States of America. So if you're planning a trip to the US, or maybe you're already in the US and looking for some new destinations to go to, my guest today is going to spill the beans on some great places, great vacations, or as we call them in other parts of the world, holidays to different parts around the United States, and what he thinks are some of the best spots that we should all go and check out. And we're going to learn a lot of little tidbits about holidaying in the United States as well. So stay tuned. We're going to get into it right now. Let's go across and meet my guest for this episode. So it's a really good welcome today to the Global Travel Channel podcast show to Bob Di Menna. Bob, welcome to the show, mate.
Hey, thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here today.
So good talking to you again, and we were just having a quick chat offline before we started the show today, talking about how you and your buddy Elliot are pumping out the podcast, man. The Traveler's Blueprint. What a fantastic show.
Yeah, we're cranking away, and our hope is to talk to as many people as possible this winter, and so we can enjoy our own travels through the summertime.
Yeah, terrific. So how long have you guys been podcasting now?
I think almost 2 years now, maybe, close to that.
You're obviously enjoying it to still be going?
We are. It works out really well for us because we actually don't travel that often anymore. It came to be as a result of us settling down with families and our careers and getting mortgages, buying homes. And so we had this knack to still understand what was going on in the world and speak to the people we were reading about and seeing online. And so we came to the idea to sort of get together and create a travel podcast where we would live vicariously through the travelers that we read about. And that's kind of how it took off. And we've been pretty consistent with that, where we read an article online of someone doing something amazing in the world and we email them and talk to them. And we connected with you. We had you on the podcast. It's been quite fun.
Fantastic. I think it's a great way of doing it because, one, it saves you a lot of money, doesn't it?
It does.
You don't have to go and buy those airline tickets for yourself. And secondly, you get to see the world through other people's eyes, which I think is such a cool thing.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I think you can agree with this. One of the greatest things about travel is meeting the people that you meet as you're moving along. And we essentially continue to do that by sitting in our homes. We're talking to people that we would have met otherwise on the road somewhere in the world, and now we get to do it from the comfort of our homes with a cup of coffee and have these in-depth, very personal travel conversations. And it's a great time to be alive in that regard, technologically speaking, because we can continue to fill that craving that our body needs.
Yeah, that's what I love about podcasts. You're having a real conversation. I just find it so rewarding when you actually can take the time to sit down. You've got a microphone in front of your face. You're concentrating on what the other person's listening to. And for me, it brings that conversation to life.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah. So whereabouts in the world are you chatting to me from today?
So I am in New Jersey. I am about 20 minutes outside of the city of Philadelphia, one of the founding cities of the United States of America. It is where the Declaration of Independence was signed, and it is one of the most historic cities in this country.
Fantastic. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show today was we're going to talk about all things USA, because I'm getting really excited as we were just chatting. I'm going to be starting my adventure over there shortly, and I thought, well, there's a lot of people around the world that actually haven't traveled to the US, and they don't know a lot about the US in terms of, the cultural side of it, but they also don't understand how amazing it is as far as a country and the contrast that you can find in your country. So I want to talk to a real American guy today, and that's you, and have a chat about your wonderful country and some of the travel experiences that you've had in your country. And I've got a whole lot of random questions here I'm just going to chuck at you as well to
Perfect.
try and give people a little bit more information about traveling in the US, yeah?
Yeah.
So, New Jersey, have you lived there all your life?
Between Philadelphia and New Jersey are the only two places I've ever lived. So I was born in Philadelphia. My parents, my grandparents migrated to the United States from Italy and settled in Philadelphia. My parents were both born in Philadelphia. I was then born in Philadelphia. And then when I was young, maybe about 10 years old, we moved to New Jersey into the suburbs. And when I got a little bit older, after I graduated college, uni, I think is what you guys call it. But when I graduated, I went back into the city. I was, a young 20-something guy who wanted to get that urban experience, and I moved back to Philadelphia. Now that I have a daughter of my own and I'm married, I moved back to the suburbs, back into New Jersey, and that's sort of where I settled down now. So it's funny how that kind of cycled around a little bit.
So why did the Italian family choose to end up in Philadelphia? What was the draw card there?
I think Philadelphia was a good working class city. And so for the Italians who came over into New York City, I guess they needed a place to go. South Philadelphia, in particular, has a very large Italian population. And it was just sort of that blue collar working class that came here, worked their butts off, and made money that way. And there ended up becoming a very tight-knit group of Italians in the southern Philadelphia region that a lot of the older ones never moved. A lot of them still live there, but you notice that as the generations went on and the immigrants who originally came had kids, you started to see people move out, maybe focus more on schooling and not the blue-collar type of jobs, and then you started to see this migration of Italians sort of move out into the suburbs.
Mm-hmm. Although we've got to say that the east coast of the United States is pretty much home to a lot of Italians, and it's you go to New York City, of course, and you find a real huge population of Italians in New York City, but it's pretty much the same down the east coast, isn't it?
Yeah, so South Philadelphia has a very Brooklyn-y vibes when it comes to Italian culture. But yeah, I would say New York, even Boston. Boston has a big Irish population, but yeah, New York and Philadelphia are two huge Italian hubs. And then as you get further south, I think it might start to thin out. It's hard now to judge uh, the locations of people based on ethnicity because it seems like we kind of just spread out everywhere now. I don't know if I would say that there's one particular city that has a certain ethnicity more than another. I could be wrong in that, but
Mm.
I think for the most part, even Philadelphia, I wouldn't say is an Italian city anymore. It's very much a melting pot of cultures, um, just like New York City.
That's one of the things I love about traveling, actually, is when I go to a place to hear the different accents and dialogues and, sorry, dialects, not dialogues. Well, yeah, dialogues as well. But it's interesting to I guess get a feel and a pulse for a city by all the different cultures that exist within that city, and whether they be tourists or whether they be locals or people that have immigrated there from all parts of the world. It kind of, I think it's changed a lot over the years in terms of a lot of cities around the world now are very multicultural. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the beautiful things about the United States. We're such a large country, and we have so many major cities that they each tend to grow their own personality in a way. Your experience in New York City is going to be vastly different than your experience in Houston, Texas, and that experience will be vastly different than your experience in San Francisco or Seattle. So each pocket of the country has its own subculture, so to speak. And I think for someone traveling from outside of the United States, it's almost better to look at the country as a conglomeration of different cultures, and as you travel through each state, you're almost traveling into a different country. And the states that are close together tend to be very similar, but if you were to hang out in New York City for a week and then go to southern Louisiana or southern California, you're going to meet people that are, it's almost like you would be going from, France to Thailand. They're very different. The way they speak, the attitude they have towards work, their demeanor, everything is different. People in the South tend to move at a much slower pace, as whereas people in the Northeast are all about hustle and bustle. You have the people on the west coast of California who are very relaxed. You have the North Pacific, where Seattle and Oregon, where it's more of the hipstery, outdoorsy vibes. So the United States is beautiful in that we have this very, very large country, and we're all so different. And it's been really fun to experience that as an American, because growing up here, I always looked outward at Europe and Asia and Australia, and never really thought to look in at my own country and say, hey, I'm living in one of the most unique countries on the planet. Maybe I should see what it's all about.
Do you think that's one of the reasons why a lot of Americans don't have a passport? Do you think it's because they're spending so much time exploring their own country because of that diversity that exists there?
I don't. I've thought about why Americans don't tend to travel, and I don't really have an answer. It seems like Americans really like being in America. They really like the United States, and they have this level of comfort of, I mean, I know most people throughout the world know this. Americans are very proud to be American, and it's almost as if Americans don't care. And now I don't want to speak for everybody, because there might be Americans that are listening to this, like, I don't know what I'm talking about. And to me, I'm not even one of those Americans. I love seeing the world. Traveling is my favorite thing to do. But I think there is a huge chunk of the population that just really doesn't have any interest in other cultures, unfortunately. I think that ties into it more than them traveling around, because in addition to Americans not having passports, I don't know how many people are traveling around the country that regularly.
So let's look at your own situation. How old were you when you first had an international travel experience?
Well, see, yeah, this is actually perfect. I was 26 years old. So I was an adult before I left the country.
Mm. Did you go
So
to
my
Italy?
No, I went to Thailand. Well, so I went to Abu Dhabi for 2 days, and then Thailand for 9, and that was my first international experience.
What made you go to Abu Dhabi of all places as your first travel
Well,
experience?
the trip was really for Thailand, and the reason I picked that is because I wanted to remove myself from American culture, and that seemed like the good spot. Abu Dhabi was actually a layover, and the flight to Thailand was significantly cheaper if I chose to get that layover. And I saw that as an opportunity to see two countries for cheaper than I would get to see, if I were to only go into one. So I jumped on it.
So it's interesting that you were that age when you first left the United States. What was your, I guess, preconceived ideas of the rest of the world up until that time when you actually could get out there and have a look at it for yourself? Did you have a preconceived vision on what you were expecting to see when you're out there in the world?
Well, I've always been a big reader, and I've always been big on National Geographic and Discovery Channel. So I think I had a good understanding of what the world was like, just based on my preference of entertainment. Now, experiencing it is a completely different thing, and the first time I stepped off a plane in a different country, it was pretty profound to say that, I'm not. It almost felt like walking out of the front door of your house and throwing yourself into, I don't know, some brand new environment. It was almost like a high. It was like a head rush. It was very thrilling for me to be put in a situation where I wasn't comfortable with, and that sort of became addicting in itself to want to get out there and see more places. But yeah, it was eye opening, and that was absolutely the jumping off point that's led me to my travel podcast, and I'm now feeding this addiction that I have to wanting to learn as much as I possibly can about the world.
Yeah. How long were you in Thailand for on that original trip?
It was only 9 days. So it was
Mm-hmm.
9 days. We did
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of different things. We were in Phuket. We went to Koh Phi Phi, Krabi. It was more like an island tour. It was a very touristy experience. It was all planned out. It was through a company called Kentucky, which I know is
Mm-hmm.
very popular in Australia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, it was a great way to get my feet wet with travel. Um, and then once I learned what it was actually involved, I quickly realized that I could do all the planning on my own. And that's kind of what led me into the Traveler's Blueprint. And that's why it's named the Traveler's Blueprint, because I genuinely enjoy the planning of travel just as much as traveling itself.
Mm. So, in terms of that Kentucky experience, how did you come across that? Was that all part of the result of your research you were doing into traveling?
So that was from scrolling on Instagram. A girl I was friends with was in Thailand, and I saw her pictures, and I messaged her and said, "Hey, this looks incredible. This is an amazing trip. How did you plan this?" And she just basically sent me the link to Kentucky. I looked into it a bit and ended up booking.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm always fascinated by how people actually come about going to a particular destination and what was the inspiration behind it. And I think if you ask people, you get a different and varied story all the time about, okay, how did I end up in this place? Well, somebody told me this, or I saw a photo here, or I was listening to this podcast, or there's always different ways that people get connected to going to a certain travel spot.
Yeah, I always knew. So living in the United States, I've always been drawn to exotic places. It's
Mm.
always been jungles and white sand beaches and European architecture that has fascinated me. And so when I saw the pictures of Thailand, it kind of just added up to what was already, lifelong interest in that region of the world. And the idea of immersing myself in a culture just so unfamiliar to my own
Mm.
really did
Mm.
it for me, and that's what ultimately made me pull the trigger and go.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, let's drag ourselves back into your home country again and start talking about some of the wonderful destinations that people can travel to around the US. I think it'd probably be a good idea to start off with talking about Philly because it's a city I've only been to a few times, and I can't say I know it well because I've always been either in transit or doing something else unrelated to specifically going to Philly to check it out. And I think it's one of those cities, isn't it, that people don't really put at the top of their agenda necessarily, and therefore they probably don't get to see what the best of Philly has to offer. So, what can you tell us about Philadelphia?
So if you're a big history buff, and United States history in particular, obviously, this is the spot to be. It has a lot of the old architecture, and it's rightfully named Old City, where a lot of the founding fathers settled, worked on the Declaration of Independence, and sort of wrote the blueprint for what would be the United States of America. There was a lot of activity back in the founding of the country here, and so it's a great place to start when you're visiting the United States, especially if you're interested in history. Now, that's sort of the now that the some of the things that you can actually see. You can go to Independence Hall, the Liberty Bell, the infamous Liberty Bell. I don't know how familiar foreigners are with the Liberty Bell, but it is
Mm,
significant to the
mm,
United States. You can actually see that here. So that's sort of like the old Philadelphia and what has drawn people to Philadelphia for a very long time. Now, Philly itself is actually moving into a more trendy uh, tourism sector, and you're seeing beer gardens and restaurants and world renowned chefs sort of migrate into the city and build up this young, hip atmosphere. And it's becoming very lively and a really fun city to be in. In addition to the old city area, you have the art museum district, or it's known as Fairmount, and you have the infamous Rocky steps that have been depicted in multiple Rocky movies. Now, that's
mm,
actually the neighborhood I lived in, and
mm-hmm.
behind the art museum, you have the biggest urban park in the country, known as Fairmount Park, even larger than New York City's Central Park.
Mm,
It is a beautiful place to run, and if you are in the city, I highly recommend a walk along the Schuylkill River, where you can see Boathouse Row and some really cool old architecture. Now, when I say old architecture, I like to paraphrase that it's old architecture relatively speaking, to the United States. Most people who travel to the United States come from countries with much older architecture, so it's always funny to have that comparison. But
I like what you're talking about though, because I think it's important to understand the history of a country. And often when we travel somewhere, and some of those places you've mentioned today, Abu Dhabi and Thailand, and people go there all the time for holidays these days, and they probably don't spend a lot of time finding out about the history of the place and what the roots are of the country. And I think what you've just explained about Philly is a fantastic thing. You could spend quite a lot of time there. What kind of, if someone's coming to the US for, let's say 3 weeks or a month vacation, which is obviously a long period of time for a lot of people, how much time would you suggest to spend in Philly to see all the key points of Philadelphia if they were going to go to Philly?
if you had a month to travel through the United States, you could probably see all of Philadelphia within 3 to 4 days.
Mm.
If you really had to, you can cram it down into less than that. But to really experience it, so this is the thing with not just Philadelphia, but any city, I think, in the world. You could have these cities are so different culturally and architecturally that you can have a different experience almost every time you go. Now, you can go to Philadelphia and you can experience just the architecture, or you can make it a point to experience just the food, or you could just do your own walking tour and walk through the various neighborhoods and see the change in the atmosphere. Or you can go, shopping and spend time in the ritzy area and get, your high-end shopping done. So what's really important is to narrow down what you want to get out of your experience in Philadelphia or any city in the United States, and then plan around that. Because you could spend 3 weeks in Philadelphia and still not see it all. I don't think I've seen it all, and I've lived there. So
Yeah.
it's a beautiful place to go, and there's just so much to do.
What would you say is the best time of the year to visit Philly?
Spring. So April, May, even June is my favorite time to be there. It's when, everybody's kind of shaking off the winter dust and getting outside, and the flowers are starting to blossom in Fairmount Park. The trees are getting leaves, and the shops are starting to open. People tend to put their chairs outside on the sidewalk so you can start to eat outside, and the city just seems to come to life, and everybody's happy. The warm weather's coming, and so it's a good atmosphere. Everybody's in a great mood, and I think that's the best time to go, in my opinion.
Okay, great. So we're not too far away from that time of the year now. So if you're thinking of a trip to the United States, and you're looking for a place to go that you probably wouldn't normally go to, then add Philly onto the list, that's for sure.
And you know what?
Okay, yeah,
You,
sorry.
and you gotta grab a cheesesteak. We almost forgot.
A cheesesteak, yes.
You
Now,
have to.
I remember back, when was I last in Philly? Probably 20 years ago now. There was a bit of a crime issue in the city. Has that sort of cleaned itself up now?
Well, I wouldn't say crime has cleaned itself up in Philadelphia, but they've definitely done a good job of cleaning up certain neighborhoods. And
Mm.
so you want to stay in the more commercial areas. The city is massive, and there's millions of people who live there. So crime is probably never going to be removed from the city. But it's important to stay in the neighborhoods that have high commercial districts. So the Rittenhouse neighborhood, the Fairmount neighborhood, East Passyunk, Old City, those are all very good starting points, and the surrounding blocks have great stores and restaurants, and I think overall you'll have a really good experience no matter what you do within those neighborhoods. Neighborhoods that tend to have a little bit of a worse reputation tend to be north of the city and southwest of the city, just as a general rule of thumb.
Okay, so it's not dissimilar to any other place in the world. Be aware, be conscious. Ask some locals, particularly when you arrive, where to go and where not to go. Especially if you're heading out at night time and you're walking around a place, you also want to make sure that you're in the right place at the right time, not the wrong place at the right time. Yeah, so that's
Right.
good. Okay, let's move on from Philly. What else have you got for us today? What are the favourite travel destinations within the United States you're going to talk to us about?
Well, so it like I said, it's such a different country that it all depends on the type of experience you want to have. So some people should travel to the United States, and if shopping and eating is your thing, then I would definitely say focus your trip on the cities, because we have some of the best cities in the world. They're so much fun. But what a lot of people seem to overlook with the United States is our natural environment. We tend to be looked at as a developed, highly populated country, but we actually have some of the most beautiful wildlife. I'm sorry, most beautiful environments in the world with national parks. We have incredible parks in California like Yosemite and Redwood, Sequoia. Then you can go up into Oregon and Washington and see the Pacific Northwest rainforest, which is an incredible experience. So I would say that if you're someone who's going to visit for the environment and get those hiking experience and you're a little bit more on the adventurous side, I would say go to the West Coast. If you wanted to focus on cities, I would say the East Coast, specifically the Northeast, is the pocket to be in, because in the Northeast you have New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, Washington D.C., all within a few hours of each other, especially if you ride, a bus or a train. But if you want to get outdoors, absolutely head out west. You could even start in Colorado, but definitely from Colorado west is the spot to be to enjoy the outdoors and the environment.
Put your hiking boots on and get on the Pacific Coast Trail and walk for a few months and
Right.
enjoy the entire west coast of the United States. That's one awesome. I was just trying to think of the book I read recently about the girl that walked
Wild?
into. Yeah, Wild. What a read. What an
I have that on my
amazing book.
I have that on my reading list. I have not read it yet, but it's actually I downloaded it to Audible, so I'm going to listen to it one of these days.
My goodness, if I'm going to ever plug a book on this show, it's going to be Wild. It was just an extraordinary human achievement to even do that, but the life-changing experience that came through that as well. So, yeah, as Bob's saying, if you're looking for almost an out-of-body experience, there's these national parks. And, I'm a New Zealander. I come from some of the best scenery in the world, and I've been blown away in different parts of the United States where, places like Montana and these places that have just incredible scenery and beautiful mountains where, you're away from the city life and you've just got this nature that's unparalleled, I reckon, in a lot of places. So maybe to help you out, Bob, I've broken down, I guess, a few categories that you can talk about traveling in the US, and that might help prompt some of your responses today. What's your favorite weekend getaway?
Ooh. Man, see, these are tough questions, not because I don't know an answer. It's just there's so many options. So, for me, where I live on the East Coast, obviously I couldn't go to California for a weekend getaway because they're 6 hours away. I mean, I guess I could, but it would just take time away. For me, though, living on the East Coast, one of the most beautiful places to see, in my opinion, are the Finger Lakes in central to upstate New York. Now, these are 5 glacial lakes, very long, running from north to south. So they're almost like fingers, like 5 fingers. And along the lakes are wineries. Every mile or so, you have a brand new winery that all grow their grapes in the area and all have tasting rooms. So it's a beautiful weekend getaway if you're someone who lives on the East Coast to leave the city, go out to the Finger Lakes, and just drink some of the best wine this country has to offer, probably second to California. So another thing too is, with the beer scene popping up, the craft beer scene exploding in the United States, a lot of these wineries are now incorporating brewing into their production system. So you can go to them, and if you have people that may only like beer, some might only like wine, it's the perfect place to be because you can get either, and you could have great views of the lake. You can go out and you could kayak and get out and hike a little bit, but the real reason to go is to enjoy the wine. And to me, that's one of the most beautiful things you could do on the East Coast, to enjoy the environment.
That's a great suggestion. Now, for people that are listening in terms of getting around the United States, if you were to head up to the Finger Lakes for the weekend, what would be your chosen transportation solution to get up there?
So the United States in general is not a very public transit friendly country. So I would drive. That's my preferred method for most travel within the United States, unless you're going, at a distance that would require a flight. But I tend to drive. I've driven 10 hours. I mean, I've driven from my home in New Jersey all the way down to the tip of Florida, essentially Miami, and then I even drove down to the Florida Keys. So driving is one of the most common methods for people to travel in this country, and although it doesn't have the relaxing aspect of just hopping on public transit and enjoying the view, you do have incredible freedom with driving, and there are a lot of great open roads in this country where you can just put on some good music and just cruise. And that sort of road trip atmosphere, that road trip experience in and of itself is a great experience to have. I think that we're one of the greatest countries to be able to do that in because we are so large. So if you are driving here, if you are traveling here and you have the capability to budget for a rental car, or you have a buddy from someone you could borrow a car from, I highly recommend seeing the country that way.
That way, yeah. Okay, let's talk about favorite family vacation. Where's your favorite family vacation spot in the United States?
So I'm still working on my family. We yeah. So I have a daughter who's 1.5 now.
Okay.
Again, the my favorite family vacation. I think what you're gonna see with me, or a lot of these answers are gonna be more geared to the environment because I'm a big environmental guy. I like to be outdoors. So most of my answers will be in that realm. Now, moving south instead of north would be going down to the Great Smoky Mountains. So it's Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and there's a city right on the edge of that park called Asheville, North Carolina. This city is now becoming a hub for sort of a hipstery environment where you're getting breweries popping up, you're getting great nightlife, you're getting artists coming in, it has a good music scene, and it's right on the cusp of one of the most beautiful parks in the country. So a good idea would be to go down to this city. You have the options for a semi large urban environment, but you also have the option to rent multiple cabins on like Airbnb, where you're actually in the wilderness. You can get a cabin overlooking the mountain range or the valley, and then still be able to have that city experience as well. So you're not so far removed from civilization to where you're backpacking or you're living off of whatever you bring in. You kind of get a mix of both, and it's still in the East Coast, so you're not too far away from everything.
Yeah, that's a brilliant suggestion. So from where you are, how many hours driving does it take you to get down to Asheville?
That would be about 8 hours, 8, 9 hours.
Okay, so it's a pretty good day's hike, yeah?
Yep. The goal is to leave 4:30 in the morning. You wake up, you hit the road, and it's definitely takes some time, but like I said, that's part of the travel experience.
So when you do a road trip like that, are you somebody that just has to get to the destination as quickly as possible, or are you stopping off along the way and looking at all the different sites and places you go through?
Because I've been down there now, I'm more of a let's get there. But if I were someone new to the United States, I would highly recommend looking at different options for your route. You never know when you could peel off to the side of the road somewhere with an overlook. Actually, this is a perfect example. So on your way from, let's say, Washington, D.C. south into the Carolinas and into Virginia, or I'm sorry, into Virginia, then the Carolinas, there is this drive, and I think it's like 150 miles or something like that, and it's called Skyline Drive in Virginia, and it is one of the most beautiful drives that you can experience in the United States. It might be one of the most beautiful drives in the world. It's this winding road of mountain overlooks in this beautiful historic wilderness. I think it's the largest black bear population in the United States, so black bears frequently walk along the sides of the roads. It's just such an incredible place. That's actually a park that's very close to my heart because it's somewhere that my wife and I have gone multiple times over the years, and it's just I love it there. And if you are driving, there are multiple drives just like that throughout the entire country. So do your research before you go anywhere, plan it out, and make sure that you hit everything you can, because you never know what you're going to miss if you're just cruising on the highway.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about your favorite winter destination holiday in the United States. Where's the best place to go that you've been to in the wintertime?
So Colorado is a highly sought after destination for those who are involved in winter sports. Now, I'm not a big skier or snowboarder, but I do have friends that go there on a very regular basis. Aspen, Breckenridge are very popular destinations for those who are into those winter sports. I like to snowshoe and I like to hike. even in the wintertime. And something else that I've done there is dog sledding and snowmobiling. So the Colorado's, the Rocky Mountain National Park is, in my opinion, it might be my favorite national park. I don't know. There's just something about it that's really appealing to me. But to be able to go there and have all of these options, whether you're not, snowboarding, skiing, snowshoeing, dog sledding, and snowmobiling, there you could do something new every day. You could do the same thing every day. I think that the outdoorsy, the adventurous side of me really likes that, and I think anybody who enjoys things like that would really find Colorado a lot of fun.
So obviously to get there from where you are, it's a flight. So what's your favorite budget airline at the moment?
So, I'm not a big budget airline guy. I tend to be a points collector. So I living outside of Philadelphia, American Airlines is a big Philadelphia hub. So one of the biggest actually. So I tend to fly American Airlines no matter what to collect the points. Now, that being said, if I saw a flight that was significantly cheaper than American Airlines, then I would book it. And that tends to be Southwest. Southwest, I think, is probably the cheapest to fly throughout around the United States. But unless it's significantly cheaper, I tend to be okay with spending a little bit more money pocketing those points, which I ultimately use for international travel.
Yeah. So, for the sake of the listeners today, trying to get some idea on not only destinations but cost of, traveling in the United States and holidaying in the United States, what would roughly a Southwest flight cost from Philly to Colorado, Denver?
I think it's safe to say in the $400 range.
Okay. Yeah. That's a return flight.
That's a round trip flight from Philadelphia to Colorado. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that sounds about right.
And flying time, we're talking probably 4 hours?
That's right around 4 hours.
4 hours, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I just looked it up actually. I mean, this is in April, but Philadelphia to Denver, Colorado on Frontier, 4 hours and 37 minutes for $108. So I think depending on when you book plays a big role in it, but
Yeah.
so if you have enough time and you could book in advance, it looks like you can save a significant amount of money.
But there's still snow down, so there'll be still some good skiing to be had.
I have friends who are there right now who they're getting hit pretty hard with some really good snow for skiing.
Yeah, so just over $100 to get from the East Coast into Colorado. That's a really good deal.
It's a great deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, let's flip it on the head and let's talk about the hot summertime destinations. Where are some of your favorite places to go in the summertime?
So living in New Jersey, one of the main places for us New Jerseyans to go is the Jersey Shore. So I know that's going to ring a bell and people are going to think of that show. It's really nothing like the show. Now, I should say that there is a neighborhood along the Jersey coast that very much has people that seem like they were on that show. But for the most part, the Jersey Shore is a large coastline with a lot of attractions and a ton of different towns with some are more family oriented, some have amusement parks. And so for me, I'm about 45 minutes away from the Jersey Shore. I tend to go there pretty often during the summertime. Now, other destinations, a lot of people in this country like to go down to Disney World in Florida. I'm not a huge Disney guy. It's not, amusement parks aren't really my thing, but I know there's a big appeal there because that place makes a lot of money.
Yeah, that's interesting though. Like I can't even begin to count how many times I've been to the US over the years, but I've never been to a theme park when I've been in the US, and I'm quite proud to say that because I just think the US has got so much to offer than having to go and sit on a roller coaster and stand in a queue all day to be lining up for stuff. But anyway, each to their own, and everybody has a reason why they want to go there. But I guess the point of this show today is to say, hey, there's a lot out there in the United States to go and see. You don't have to go to a theme park.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the overall thing for summertime is to head to a coastline. In my opinion, you have beautiful beaches. I mean, we have very large coastlines on both sides. So California beaches are world renowned. They're beautiful. I've been to San Diego in the summertime, and they were some of the most life-changing experiences of my life. The food there is amazing, the people are amazing, and the water is perfect. Now,
Well, San Diego year round. You can go there any time of the year, and it's
right,
wonderful.
right. Yeah. But anywhere on the coast, really, you can have a good time. I mean, New Jersey all the way down to Florida and then into the Keys are perfect for the
Yep.
beach weather, in
Yep.
the summertime. And then same for the West Coast. The majority of it is beautiful, and you can really have fun there. If you have the money and you have the time, I couldn't recommend Hawaii more. I've been
Yep.
there, and it's amazing. But again, it's very far and very expensive.
So tell me about that. I'm really interested to know more about the psychology behind the American traveller. And you're an East Coast boy, and you've been talking so far on the show about all these places that are predominantly East Coast based, where you go and have your vacations. Do you get across the West Coast much, or is it just too far, and there's so many nice places to go on the East Coast that you kind of go, oh, we don't need to travel that far?
No, I've been to the West Coast a lot, and I prefer it. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm a big outdoorsy guy, and on the East Coast we just don't have a lot of that because we kind of developed it all. So going out to the West Coast is always a treat for me. It's the beyond the natural environment. I do really enjoy the culture there. It's much slower. It's much more relaxed than it is on the East Coast. They have a different appreciation for the environment, and so I feel very comfortable being among that type of population. Yeah, no, I highly recommend the West Coast.
So tell me about the cost of traveling in the United States. So when you go across to the West Coast, and you've got your normal things to pay for, accommodation and rental car and all those sorts of things, do the costs work out pretty much the same across the country, or are you paying a little bit less in California than you would be over in the eastern side of the United States? And I'm talking about generally across the board. So do you have to budget and take the airline equation out of it for a second, I guess, in terms of just the on-the-ground budget costs? Is it cheaper per day to go and visit the West Coast than it is to do on the East Coast for a holiday?
So it varies. So I think California in general is very, very, very expensive. Now the East Coast, I think, is cheaper with the exception of New York City. Once you venture outside of New York City, I think you'll see prices drop significantly. And if you were to visit, let's say, Manhattan, I would highly recommend staying outside of the city in a town close to a train station that you could then take into the city for the day and then go back to your hotel. You'll save a ton of money that way. Same thing with California, San Francisco, Los Angeles, some of the most expensive cities to ever exist. And if you're on a budget, I don't think it's wise to stay within the city itself. I think it would be much smarter to stay outside of the city, find a town that's close to a train station, just hop on the train. It's essentially a commuter train for the people who work in the city. Hop on that, go into the city, enjoy it, explore it, and then go back. You'll add, there's a few more steps to your trip, but you'll save a few $100s. And if you're staying there for an extended period of time, I mean, New York City, easy $300 for an okay hotel room.
Yeah.
That's not luxury. That's an okay standard room.
Yeah.
So, and the prices just go significantly higher than that. Same thing with San Francisco and Los Angeles.
And we're talking $300. So for most of the people outside of the US, that's add your other, for Australian dollar at the moment, $1.35 Australian to get $1 American dollar. So it adds another 30% on top of your cost straight away. So that's a really good tip, is to stay outside the city and to get public transport in, which, you said earlier in the show that the public transport system's not of the highest standard in the United States, but for trips like that where you are staying relatively close to a city, it's pretty easy to get into town and back, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the public, when I said the public transit isn't that great, I meant for cross country travel.
Right.
It's doable. You can do it, but it's not the greatest. The public transit in an area surrounding a major urban center is pretty good, just because it has to have, these people have to have access to go in and out every day for work. Most people live outside of the city. They'll go in, they'll work for the day, and they'll go back out. I think that's pretty common. But so that's the public transit I'm referring to when I say you should use that to travel in and out each day.
Sure. Now, Airbnb, are you an Airbnb guy? Has it
Yes.
changed the way that you've traveled as far as accommodation goes?
Yeah, I pretty much always look to Airbnb first. I think that, you can find cheaper Airbnbs in major cities than hotel rooms. That'll probably change because I think hotel rooms are going to catch on, and if they haven't already, start to lower their prices to accommodate the people that would normally use them, but go to Airbnb instead. But yeah, I'm a big Airbnb fan.
Hmm.
I've used them around the world now.
That's an interesting point that you've just raised about the hotels. Have you actually seen evidence of the hotels dropping their prices yet because of the impact of Airbnb?
No, I haven't yet. I can't say that I've really looked too much, but no, overall, I think I don't know if a large enough percentage of our population is going to Airbnbs. I think older generations are not going to do it. I've talked to people who are a little bit older, and there's still something, they're weird about the idea of staying in someone's home or apartment, and they'd rather just stay in a hotel. So I think people, older who have been traveling for some time tend to stick with they're used to, and they're going to stay with hotels. But maybe as more younger people start to travel and pick up a larger percentage of the travel population, maybe those hotels will try to come down a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So if I asked you what's your favorite state in the United States, what would you say to me?
California.
Uh-huh. And the reasons?
Because California is a very large state with multiple environments. So in a matter of hours, you can be on the coast of San Diego, enjoying the sun, enjoying a cocktail. You could drive a few hours inland and you could be in the mountains, or you could drive into Yosemite, or you could really immerse yourself in an environment that you feel far removed from civilization. And there's just something about that drastic change that's really appealing to me. You have the Redwood National Park, you have Sequoia National Park, you have Yosemite, you have some of the most amazing environments in the country, and then you could still go back and have fun in the city. In addition to San Diego, you have Los Angeles, you have San Francisco, and then you have Sonoma Valley, which is the wine region with some of the best wines in the entire world. So there's just so much to do in California that it's hard to top. It's hard to beat.
Yeah, and if you've got time, that Pacific Coast Highway between Los Angeles and San Francisco, along through Santa Barbara and Big Sur and up through that way, is absolutely fantastic. And there's a lot of, again, amazing places to see. A lot of kind of niche little wineries and places where people have moved out of the city and set up little, we call them bed and breakfasts and all those sorts of things, which are really cute to stay at. And it's an amazing coastline along there as well.
Yeah, I've done a portion of it, never the whole thing. Maybe one day.
Okay, well, you've got to get back and do that. I can highly recommend that one.
Yeah.
So for people listening today who, again, are thinking of coming to the United States for a trip, what would be one of the things that you'd say not to do when you're traveling in the US? What's a tip that you'd say to a traveler? Make sure you don't do this when you're in the US.
That's an interesting question. So, I mean, I think it's important to know what you want to see prior to coming to the United States, because it's so different and there are so many options. So the one thing I would say not to do is come without a plan, because I think you'll end up scrambling for what you might want to see. But I don't know if there's anything that I would say. I don't want to say don't go to this state, don't go to this state, because they're each so different and they each have something to offer any traveler. So, yeah, I think the main thing is to just come with a plan.
Yeah, exactly. Know where you want to go and what you want to see.
Right. If you want to go for the urban experience, go to the Northeast. If you want to go to the environment, and there's also the South. We didn't really get to talk about that too much, but there is a beautiful southern region of the United States that has its own subculture that is very, very different from the West Coast and the East Coast, and also worth experiencing it in its own way.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that, because I think the South is a fascinating part of the United States with its own unique culture. And if you go to cities right across from, Houston, San Antonio, all the way across, Alabama and into the top end of Florida, you've got a lot. And then New Orleans, how can you go to the United States without going to New Orleans? Right. There's such diversity in all of these places. And out of those southern cities, which ones do you like the best?
Oof, man. So I loved New Orleans because I'm a foodie. I really liked my time there. I've been through Alabama and Arkansas and Mississippi, but yeah, I guess my favorite city out of all of them would probably be New Orleans. I really like San Antonio in Texas.
Yep.
And then I've been down to Florida, into Miami, and into the Florida Keys, which are beautiful as well. So, but if I had to pick one, if I said one city that I really enjoyed in the United States, in the southern United States, I'd go with New Orleans, I think.
New Orleans, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
As you say, if you're a foodie, and there's always great entertainment there. It's happening in a live city as well. And the southern people have that real way about them, don't they? It's a very unique culture in that part of the world.
They're very friendly, very
Yeah.
accommodating. That there's that saying, the Southern hospitality. The people in the South tend to move at a much slower pace than, let's say, a New Yorker. They kind of like to enjoy their time and enjoy their lives a little bit more. There's not this urgency to get things done and get to where they're going, and there's a lot of focus on their food. There's a big Cajun influence down there, and so the food is really, really good. Lots of fresh seafood from the Gulf of Mexico. So I highly recommend experiencing that city.
Totally right. Now, for a lot of people that haven't been to the US before and considering a visit to the US, and I remember the first time I went to the US all those years ago, the whole concept of tipping was very strange to me, and I couldn't really understand it. Now, you guys you're born and bred into it, so you don't even look twice when it comes to tipping for services. But can you explain to us the philosophy behind how the whole wage system works, income system works for people in the service industry in the United States? Because it is something that does impact the cost of your trip, and you've got to take it into consideration because it is part of the culture of the United States. Just explain to us how all that tipping thing works in the United States.
So I don't know the rhyme or reason behind it, but I can explain to you what's going on here. So for some reason, we have a set minimum wage, which I believe right now is seven or so dollars per hour, maybe $8 per hour.
$7.52 an hour. That's right.
$7.52. Yeah. So for some reason, there is a wage for people in the service industry that's set around $2.40, I think, an hour, somewhere around there. And so these people are only making $2 an hour, and the idea is you are expected to tip 20% of your bill for food services. And that's really how they make a large portion of their income. So when people don't tip, it does hurt the waiter or waitress. Now, I've never worked in the food industry myself, but I do have friends that have done it, and it's really important to them to get that 20%. I don't necessarily agree with the system being set up like this. I don't know why we would set wages that low and then expect people to tip on top of the bill. That's actually something interesting that I should probably look into. But it is just a norm. It's a habit that I've grown to just know. I just automatically tip 20%. Even knowing how much they're making, even if the service is not great, I still do 20% just because, I don't know. I feel like I should. I want to help that person out because I do know that they're making a very low wage. That actually, that carries over for me into Europe, and I tend to tip. I almost feel awkward not tipping, even though I know it's not a cultural norm and it's not expected. It's so ingrained in my experience that I tip 20% anyway, which I've talked to other Americans that do the same thing. You almost feel guilty walking out of a restaurant without doing it now.
That's why I brought it up, because it is a culturally inbred thing that you Americans are used to doing. But for people who are traveling from another part of the world where tipping is very, very foreign, and, I remember when I went to the United States for the first time, I was 16 and a half years old. I'd come out of New Zealand. We don't have tipping in New Zealand. I had no idea. And I made someone very, very upset because the first meal I had, I didn't tip, and I didn't understand what it was all about. And I quickly got to learn, of course, that if I wanted to have good service and I wanted to be looked after, then I should be making a tip. But I think it's just one of those little things that, one, we don't talk a lot about it and the background behind it and the reasons why it exists. And two, making sure that people do, when they travel, adhere to the local conditions of hospitality industry. I think it's very important.
Yeah, so I think as a general rule of thumb, tipping 20% of your meal is pretty standard. Tipping $1 per drink when you're out at the bar is standard. So, which sometimes I think about it and it kind of blows my mind that I can order a beer and the bartender will grab the beer out of their cooler, flip the top off, and they get an extra $1. like I said, I don't know the rhyme or reason, but I've always done it that way. No matter what my drink is, no matter if they spend time actually making a cocktail or handing me a beer, they get $1. We
Yeah.
tip for haircuts. We tip the taxi drivers. So yeah, I guess it is something that unfortunately for a lot of people coming to the United States, it just increases the amount of money that they have to spend while here. And it seems like one of the first things that you would cut out to save money. But I would just stress that yeah, a lot of these people are only making a few bucks an hour, specifically the waiters and waitresses, and that they do rely on these tips. So I think to help them, it would be wise to maybe incorporate those costs into your budget, into your food planning budget.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why I raised it today. Is I want people to be aware that maybe first-time travelers to the United States or don't understand really the whole ethos behind this tipping process. It can add quite a significant amount, well, 20%, right, on top of your, or even more, 20% plus on top of your travel costs to the United States. So be aware of it. Make sure that you adhere to it because, as Bob is rightly saying, these people are on a very minimum or below minimum wage, and they rely on that money to survive in a lot of cases. So let's make sure we play our part. Now, I can't let you go today without asking you whether you've got a medical plan in place when you're traveling around the United States, Bob.
So I did not, but after we talked, you brought travel's insurance to my attention. So I don't know if you remember our conversation, but I didn't really ever think about travel insurance. So I'm a very healthy guy. I take my health very seriously. I eat right. I exercise on a very regular basis. So I would travel solo and never really think about it. And I mean, looking back on it, it was ignorant to do that because no matter how healthy I am, if I get hit by a car, it's gonna hurt, So I'm not saying that what I did was the right thing to do, but now that I'm getting a little bit older and wiser and settling down, I am looking into medical insurance options as I travel. And I did just that after we got off of my podcast. I actually looked into it a little bit more, and I talked to my wife about it, and we got covered for our trip coming up in Italy.
Fantastic. Well done, because you can look after your own health as much as you possibly are, but you can never take into effect the little accidents that happen that are beyond your control. And it's usually those things that happen when you're least expecting it that put you in a situation that you may not have planned for. So I'm very pleased to hear
Yeah.
that you've got yourselves covered. That's great news.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to feel better too, knowing that I have that coverage.
So when are you off to Italy, and whereabouts are you going to in Italy?
So I'm not going until September, thankfully, because they're hit pretty hard right now with the coronavirus. But we actually have a pretty extensive trip planned. We are flying into Venice, several days there. Then we're going to go down to Florence, go out into the Tuscan countryside, make our way down into Rome, then Naples, do the Pompeii tour, make our way down into Sorrento, and then from Sorrento use it sort of as a base for Capri and Positano and things like that. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be our first trip with our daughter, who she'll be 2, just turned 2 at the time. So it'll be a learning experience for us, and adding a wrench to the whole thing. We'll see how we handle that. But yeah, really looking forward to it.
That'll be an amazing trip, and it sounds like you've got a fantastic itinerary plan there as well. Is this going to be a little bit of following the family history in Italy at all? Is there going to be some part of that?
No, not really. So we will end up in the area that our family is from just by default, because my wife's family they're right outside of like the Naples area. I think my family's a little bit more to the east, so I don't think we're going to get into that region as much. This is sort of like our introduction to Italy. We think, we'll go now and we'll hit all the major attractions. We'll get to see it, we'll see the highlights, and then we'll go back, and then we'll take a more leisurely approach. Maybe do more of the southern end of Italy where it's a little bit more relaxed and not have to worry about experiencing, the Colosseum and the canals of Venice. That'll already be behind us. And so that's sort of the thought process going into it.
Yeah, sounds like a great plan. Now, before I let you go today, you already mentioned it in the last conversation there about the coronavirus. What's the current situation in the United States, and what's the mentality of people over there at the moment in regards to this virus that's sweeping the world?
Yeah, well, we had our first death yesterday in Washington State. It's spreading. I right now, personally, I don't feel as though it is a major concern. I think it is. I think people should be paying attention to it and being cautious and being smart, washing their hands, not touching their faces, and just practicing good travel methods. But I still think that it is not as serious as maybe the media is hyping it up to be. The flu, for example, kills a lot more people, is much more serious. People are at risk of getting the flu. I'm not a big medical guy, but I don't think that, based on the information that I have, that there's no need to panic fully yet. Now,
Yeah.
I trust the CDC's website, which the U.S. Department has as a CDC. They put their information, they put travel restrictions up on that website. So highly recommend going to cdc.com and getting your travel information there before you travel anywhere. Now, I do know the United States has put a level 3 threat to China, South Korea, and Italy. So they're saying that unless travel is essential, do not go to these countries at this time. They put travel advisories on countries that are seeing outbreaks but not as severe. So I would highly recommend, before you go anywhere, to check that website and stay up to date that way.
Yeah, good advice. And I think if we all remain calm and educate ourselves and be vigilant about, first of all, looking after ourselves and making sure that we are hygienically clean and taking care of it, then no need to go out there and plan for doomsday just yet, right?
Right, not yet. But my thought process is, if when I go in September, the coronavirus is still an issue, and it makes it through the summer, then there's a more pressing issue on our hands globally.
Yeah, but let's take it day by day and see what happens.
Right.
Yeah. Bob, listen, it's been fantastic having you on the Global Travel Channel podcast show today. Thanks for giving us a great insight to the United States of America, a fantastic country for people to visit on vacation. And you've already mentioned how many diverse places there are to visit. So I recommend that people get off the couch, book a ticket to the United States, get over there and check it out, and dip your toes in the water, because once you go there once, you'll want to go back many times again. So been great having you on the show, Bob.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it.
And good luck with your podcast. Keep it going. Love listening to it. The Traveler's Blueprint. I'll put a note in the show notes for everybody to check out Bob and Elliot's fantastic podcast show. And I'm sure we'll speak again soon, Bob. And I'll see you when I get over to the United States.
I can't wait. I've been waiting for you, man. We'll be here.
Okay, mate. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
That was Bob Di Menna talking to me from Jersey in the United States. I was going to say the Jersey Shores, but he's not quite that close to the Jersey Shores. But there we are. Bob had some great information there for you all if you wanted to travel to the United States, or maybe you're in the United States and you want to check out some of the places that Bob has mentioned today. That's the great United States of America. It is one of the best countries in the world to travel to. And when you get out of the cities and you get into the incredible countryside, you will find places that will blow your mind away. So I recommend get over there, book a trip, get to the States, and check it all out. So that's it for this particular episode. But if you want to get a whole lot more of this great stuff, head on over to the website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. You can find out all of our previous episodes right there. You can download them as well from places like Apple iTunes under the podcast section, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play. If you're a podcast listener, you know where to go to get your podcast. Just type in Global Travel Channel and you will find us. Don't forget, I would really appreciate it if you do share our podcast with somebody close to you. Tell them there's a great travel podcast they should be listening to. Okay, time for me to go. My name's Mark Philpott, and until we meet next time on the Global Travel Channel, I wish you all a very happy and safe bon voyage.